the clothing, if you will, the garments, the illusions. What we have is simply a relatively intelligent animal that at its base is still primarily concerned with reproduction. Reproduction, reproductive drive, these are the driving forces of all living species, and human beings are no exception. Now, it is true that human beings, with their rather complex civilization and lots of technology these days, in addition to that, have a kind of sidewinderish way of going about reproduction. It's not as cut and dry as it is, say, with, well, a bunch of frogs or mice or what have you. But that said, that is, at the end of the day, what is going on. I mean, that is the foundation, the buttress of it all. Given that fact, and it is a fact, why not talk about it? By not talking about it, one is totally dodging and skipping the issue, causes, more importantly, that affect men and women. This whole mess that we're in currently is a mess that has resulted not solely from politicized feminism, but hundreds of thousands of years of hominid evolution wherein females were preferenced and privileged for the simple reason that they were the limiting factor in reproduction. By informing men of their own nature and, of course, female nature, we are arming them, in effect, in such a way as to starve the system. Most men who are aware of the facts, as depressing, as soul-crushing as they can be, are not going to put themselves in an even worse situation by getting married, by engaging in the rituals that society has deigned to be proper. They're not going to do it. I don't think women and men fit each other like kid gloves. There are conflicting interests here, and I want to stress that men and women are each other's vehicles of procreation, of reproduction, not each other's natural partners. Natural partner implies, to my mind, in the sense of a business contract, an equitable distribution of benefit to each party member. But not only in the modern sense, but if you look at our history and prehistory, we see that the equitable distribution in the so-called human relationship contract has by far gone to women, with men far, far too often getting the short end of the stick. I don't believe ultimately this can be remedied, but the precaution we can take as men going our own way, as people who just want to be informed, is to rail against that and not buy into that. By making the claim that the sexes and their differences complement each other, one is effectively making the claim that they evolved to complement each other. And as we shall see, this is completely fallacious. To begin with, the argument of completion carries with the assertion that natural selection, the force by which evolution is governed, has a purposeful aim, i.e. men and women evolved to complement each other. But we know what evolution is, and we know that evolution is a mechanical process without thought, purpose, or any form of intentionality that humans may project upon. So let's briefly look at that statement, "we're descended from women who played it safe." What does that mean in concrete, modern terms? It means an unwillingness to accept personal responsibility, and above all, a willingness to make use of proxy agents, almost invariably male. Proxy agents for violence, proxy agents for the absorption of violence, proxy agents for resource provision, proxy agents for everything. What that statement also entails is what most men have long suspected, and that the man-woman equation, women have displayed a unidirectional, unilateral interest in their own welfare, with men displaying the exact same interest, being unilateral and unidirectional, in female welfare. Fast forward to late 2012, and you have the added factor of the state, showing that same unilateral, unidirectional interest in the welfare of women as well. Now let us have a brief look at cuckoldry. Cuckoldry is basically mimicking the bird which practices the same thing. And cuckoldry in humans is simply when one man donates the sperm and another man raises the child that resulted from that sperm. That's what cuckoldry is in a nutshell. So evolutionarily speaking, cuckoldry offered the advantage to the woman that she obtained genetic material from a so-called alpha male and had a reliable so-called beta provider to raise the child resulting from medallions with the alpha. Quote, it is often suggested that 10% of children are not biologically related to their putative genetic fathers. In a recent review of 67 studies, Anderson distinguished between the studies of high and low paternity confidence samples and found median rates of actual non-paternity determined from blood or DNA exclusion tests of 2% to 30% respectively,
with much variability across studies. These data are supported by fairly high rates of extramarital affairs in both men and women. In a recent sample of 9,852 Norwegians aged 18 to 49, 16% of men and 11% of women admitted to having an affair during their current relationship, with 50% not using any form of contraception. Quote. So the numbers vary a great deal, anywhere from 2 to 30%, with 10%, from what I've often heard and read, being an off-sided average. Now, it's true that to the sperm donor, cuckoldry is advantageous, but to the provider, who is providing for the children that are not his, it is a complete loss. To the woman, she obtains the best of all worlds. Thus, even if cuckoldry is rare, it is significant enough and recurrent enough to be taken into account in male-female reproduction. Women have a decided advantage in this, in that they always know that it's their child. The purported father, however, does not. So that's cuckoldry. Another way in which men and women allegedly complement each other.
Very few women have interest in metaphysical claims about the universe. And it's just not something that they ever spend time thinking about. And you can argue till you're blue in the face that the various debates starting in, say, the 17th and 18th century, swinging between some form of theism, then with Spinoza, pantheism, and then some sort of watered-down version of theism, and then finally deism, and then you can argue till you're blue in the face that if women had been allowed to contribute, they would have written a lot more, but they simply don't have interest in that stuff. I mean, can anyone here imagine a female David Hume? I mean, writing the thing. I mean, I can't. I can't imagine a female David Hume, just as I can't imagine a female Leibniz writing about monads. And we all know that monads are bunk, but at least he took the interest, right? Nor can I imagine a female Descartes who's sitting in front of a candle talking about the candle in her pajamas, as it were. It's just, and the reason being is because women have no interest in these things. A lot of these applications, iPads, what have you, all these things, really only became popular when they were really simplified and streamlined. And then we had a female majority using them. That I in fact see a simplification of a lot of gaming aspects and gaming elements to also coincide with the sort of female infiltration. The simplification of the classic RPG system, in my opinion, has led in part to the sort of infiltration, this female grab for power, the desire to do so. When we back in the day were sorting through our inventories and looking which stats are the best, most women don't do that. They don't have interest. You streamline everything. This is my thesis, my theory. It's not consoles dumbing things down, and that might be part of it. But primarily, I think it's the presence of females and women gamers who just don't have the same passion, don't have the same interest in the intricacies of things. Women don't have an interest in these things for the most part, just like with gaming and with regards to gaming. And women, for the most part, don't have an interest in deep metaphysical claims or deep metaphysical questions of the universe. It's not really relevant to them. Women are always interested in the here and now, what brings them immediate pleasure, what makes them feel good. And of course, being the center of attention makes women feel really good. They need to be the center of attention. The 12-year-old boy in Afghanistan was an AK-47 placed in his arms, who may not live to see his 13th birth year, or certainly not grow to adulthood, that he probably has it a lot worse than if you're going to be a possession, it's better to be a treasured possession than someone you just throw away. And so the difference is between say, 45-year life expectancy and a 13 or 14-year life expectancy is pretty great, in my opinion. Yeah, so to summarize, yes, male intelligence might be somewhat greater than female intelligence, but ultimately it's a question of not using it and losing it, that women don't have the drive, they have no motivation. That's where the real problem comes from. That, coupled by what appears to be inherent female lack of inquisitiveness and desire to understand the world on any level, really, is also a major contributor and offender here. And of course, men's desire for unfreedom is in part born of their recognition of how vast the universe is and how small their place is in it. Having a small, structured, easy to understand life with a with a goddess who's telling you what to do can be quite liberating. And I don't mean that literally, of course, but it certainly can assuage your fears and make things easier for you. And yes, finally, for those who don't have access to the German, the original title, like I said, Der dressierte Mann, it uses a term that much more implies training, and that is the training that takes place in childhood rather than manipulation per se, which in my opinion, in my semantic interpretation, is much more of a thing that goes on between adults. So the question I want to ask, as I said, pose, are women selecting their mates in optimal fashion with regards to modernity, in light of the fact that our hardware is thousands, if not millions of years old? I am going to argue no. I'll give you an example. Your average woman, most women, would be very attracted to a extremely well-paid athlete of great recognition and fame, David Beckham, for example, or a Michael Jordan, or what have you. And there's no doubt that they're very talented in their respective fields, in their respective athletic fields. But the question is, all these football players, or basketball players, or even tennis players, they are contributing to the entertainment of many human beings, but in a very modest way are they in fact contributing to the advancement of humanity. What would contribute to the advancement of humanity? Well, I think it's easy to say and easy to claim, and I don't think it can be refuted, that humanity on the whole would benefit if more human beings across the board were more intelligent. But yes, a woman, of course, would be most interested in that kind of guy. High status, quote-unquote attractive, good build, lots of money, so on and so forth. He, at least in conventional evolutionary terms, would be a good mate, a good protector, and a good provider, allegedly. But he might not be contributing the IQ genes to his progeny, and the same female by the same token. And let me now castigate men. Yes, I'm castigating myself as well for our mate selection preferences. We always seek fecundity in females. We like the hip-bust ratio, relatively slim women, large breasts, shapely curves, neotenous facial features, youthful, and so on and so forth. However, it's very rare that such women bear great degrees of intelligence. It's extremely rare, in fact. Where's the problem here? The problem is that if we want to advance as a species, we need to take into account these things. That despite all of our visceral instincts in our gut and in the reptilian hindbrain and so on and so forth, that those are not the kinds of people that will be most beneficial to advancing humanity. What kinds of people would be most beneficial? Well, I look at history, and it's very revealing. Let's look at Isaac Newton and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, both of whom are credited with discovering calculus. I mean, they both, it's safe to say they sort of simultaneously discovered calculus and its applications. These were men of just tremendous, tremendous intellectual capacity. As far as their personal lives were concerned, Newton was notoriously scornful of women. He thought they were a needless distraction and they got in the way of his work. And Leibniz was, well, we know he never really settled down. He was never married. He was a bachelor his entire life, and not much more is known in that regard about him. So these are the kinds of men who were just ruthlessly devoted to their intellectual pursuits and didn't really have very much time for the whole mating game. It seems men of that kind of caliber don't, on some level, lose their interest in women because their minds are able to comprehend reality on a far greater level, and they're able to get results from that. Even if we just talk about artistic mastery, look at some of the great masters of the Renaissance. And I'm not talking about the postmodern muck mire that we're in today, but guys like Michelangelo or Da Vinci. Michelangelo was almost certainly gay. Da Vinci it's highly likely that he was gay. Of course, they didn't have any interest in women, yet I would argue those two gentlemen are perhaps the greatest, most skillful artists, painters, sculptors that have ever lived. Again, not much interest in the mating game. In their case, they were gay. So you see sort of a recurrent pattern. It's not always true. Einstein married and mated, and there does seem to be an overwhelming tendency in the greatest minds of history. So first, the kinds of men that would rightly advance humanity are not the kinds of men, A, that women want, and B, those selfsame men don't really have that much interest in women to begin with, it seems. One issue I want to touch on is this issue of status vis-a-vis wealth. Now, it is true that wealth is, of course, important, but I'm going to argue that having lots of money, even if you've earned it in a legitimate fashion, is not a one-to-one match in terms of intelligence. It doesn't directly correlate with intelligence. I mean, as I said, some of the Leibniz was never particularly wealthy, and like I said, he's one of the greatest minds who ever lived, and so on and so forth. There's no direct correlation between high degrees of intelligence and massive quantities of wealth. Sometimes that's true. I mean, look at Bill Gates. He's obviously extremely bright and was able to capitalize on it. But for those of the intellectual persuasion, say in the abstract hard sciences view of theoretical physics, for example, it's unlikely that that's going to have a direct payoff, at least in the lifetime of one individual. Much more so, it's going to happen later down the line. Discoveries. I mean, so much of our modern technology, the engineering, all of flight, all of these things we can go back. We can trace an unbroken chain of highly skilled mathematicians, most of whom are men, who discovered formulas and streamlined them, and of course Newton, Leibniz, they're among them, and so. They made no profit from it, at least not directly. So what I'm arguing here is the kinds of things that women want in a man aren't necessarily the kinds of things that are going to be best for a highly intelligent species. It's safe to say that we're getting dumber. And I think part of that, of course, is to do with women's screwy mate selection preferences. But also our male mate selection preferences. Look, I am perfectly willing to censure myself and our fellow males. Yes, we want the so-called poon, but we want it from youthful, attractive women, large, firm bust, the classic features. Women who quite often have two-digit IQs. That, of course, is not particularly beneficial in terms of advancing the species if we are to mate. If we actually could abstractly think about our prospects as a species and move past our reptilian hindbrain and our instincts, which are rooted like millions of years ago, well, maybe we could engage in a mate selection process that was much more indicative of intelligence and people's ability to evaluate reality and think analytically and so on and so forth.
I think female hypoagency has basically one source. The vast majority of females bring precious little to the table, save their vaginal orifices and their offer of sex. I will postulate in this video that female feeling of insecurity is a self-perception issue relating to self-perceived hypoagency, and that this self-perceived hypoagency is a derivative of that they too realize that the only thing they bring to the table for the most part are their vaginas and uteruses and the sex that they offer men. Beyond that, most women don't bring anything intellectual to the table. They certainly don't bring a whole lot physically to the table. That they realize themselves that they have very little to offer. However, rather than concentrating on themselves and improving themselves and their abilities, I think it's entirely possible. I do think there's certain biological imperatives which do place male intellect at the very bottom and the very top, and females in the good middle average. But there are a few achieving females out there, and there probably could be more. But the way to do that is to essentially renounce the current fact that the only commodity that females have to offer is their vagina. The only thing you had to offer was an anatomical orifice that you were born with that was congenital, and that was the only thing you could offer in terms of value. even though it's a highly, highly prized thing, as evidenced by all the manginas and 99% of the male population, you're going to end up in a difficult position. And I think this will ultimately lead to deep feelings of insecurity and the perception of oneself as suffering from hypoagency. That is, the lack of ability to affect things and to act upon things. In order to compensate for that, it appears that females are very willing to gather in a mob mentality group, whereby the perception in such a mob mentality group is that there is strength in numbers, and the illusion thereby produced in such a group that there is strength in numbers is that one's argumentation and the ability to convince is actually strengthened by the group, whereas it's actually not. Just because a lot of people agree about something doesn't mean it's true. There's no truth content necessarily in large groups agreeing with each other. In fact, I'd posit the idea that it's far less likely because large groups are often, not always, but often symbols of comfort zone, where people feel comfortable rather than zones where truth content is the main issue. Rather than bettering themselves and improving themselves, what they end up doing is gathering these mobs, appealing to, say, state power, basically appealing to bully powers in order to enforce what they think is right, or in order to at least persuade themselves of their feelings of inadequacy and insecurity. Groups whose formation is a result of people just wanting to feel comfortable with each other are invariably not going to see the logical fallacy that such a group have to offer, and the lack of truth content with regards to the topics it might be advocating. And its real reason for being there is to make the people feel good about themselves. But since women totally miss the truth content aspect, they jump to the other aspect, which is, I feel comfortable, we're all right, and they beat you over the head with a hammer. Interestingly enough, you'll often see this hammer wielded in the form of the male henchman. The male henchman is one who kowtows to the female will and one who denigrates himself in the eyes of the female in an effort to garner their favor in order to gain access to their most coveted vaginal orifice. And the consequence of the female mob mentality using male henchmen to enforce their will is devastating. It's devastating because we have an entire organization that we call the state or government that's organized around this strange genesis of things. And the consequence of that is what we see in the divorce courts, what we see in all sorts of things, financial aid, women's help centers, women curves, women only gyms, women only tennis clubs, and so on and so forth. On the whole, men are much more inclined to accept truth, even if it's unpleasant, and to appreciate the truth over merely feeling comfortable. Women seem to inevitably be more about comfort.
We don't want to admit it. Part of being a man is, of course, being alone. We exist for ourselves, and generally speaking, people don't give a shit about us unless we're doing something important. And the minute we stop doing something important, we're not important anymore. The world is afloat with well-meaning fairy tales of all manner and all sorts, and myths that are told and continue to be told in an effort to assuage our fears, to make us feel better about the reality we live in. And indeed, they can. Sometimes I come to the conclusion that delusion, mass delusion, and the illusions that lead to that delusion are a requirement for some people. For whatever reason, these people lack the capacity to accept the truth on its own terms.
Women do not love men. They do not love men. There's no woman who's going to embrace you in open arms and take away your worries and pains and cares and wants and needs. This is an illusion. This is the illusion you've been fed since your childhood. And as much as you want it to be true, it's not, and it never will be true. And I know that pains many men to hear, and I know that's the message that men do not want to hear. And I know that's part of a lot of the hostility towards men going their own way. This is the harsh reality that men need to accept, and many men just aren't there yet. They don't want to accept it. Love is a sham. It always has been. It doesn't exist. So I would strongly urge you to start looking at reality as it is. There are many people, mostly adults, who believe in all sorts of things which are patently false because it makes them feel good, or they want to have hope. Unfortunately, hope is amorphous and lacks real content. As I've said in the past, hope is the denial of reality. It is the carrot dangled before the draft horse in a vain attempt to keep it prodding on. The question you need to ask yourself as a man is, what are you prodding on for? I realize how difficult this is. I think this is, at the end of the day, the crux and the core of the issue. It is extremely painful to the male being to realize, accept, and then finally internalize that there is no woman out there who will love you. Women do not know love. And given, as has been discussed recently, the mechanization and technological advancement of modern society, they don't even need men's resources anymore, although they don't mind stealing them. There is no female angelic figure out there who's going to save you from the pain of your loneliness, who's going to show you compassion, who's going to help you. It doesn't exist. Yeah, I know. It clearly is to many men a painful realization, and the internalization of that realization no more painful. But at some point in time, you need to move past that. If at one point in time in your life, the greatest sense of fulfillment was the companionship of a woman, you need to find a new sense of fulfillment that does not reside in the companionship of a woman. If you have seen past the illusion, if you've taken the red pill, you can't go back. The words female and manipulation really go hand in hand, and there's a biological basis for it. There's a biological basis for the ability of a human female to manipulate the male, essentially to get him to do her bidding. It makes sense that women have, over the millennia and millions of years, the human female developed an ability to, they're much more efficient at socializing than men are. I mean, that's been documented in a whole bunch of studies. They had to do that in earlier times, cooperation, things of that nature. And certainly they must have, in the course of that span of time, also developed the skills, the corollary skills of being able to make a man do what she wants. And whilst the driving force behind that might be the man's desire to procreate, i.e. pussy, I think women are indeed equipped with a whole set of skills that allow them to further that. That is, social skills, cognitive skills, and other skills. Women are clearly better than men at certain things, and that's a biological basis, just as men are better at than women at certain things. And one of these things, as I said, have been saying, is manipulation. Women are consummate manipulators. You can see this on so many levels, and in modern society, you can see this manifested in the way they manipulate social justice, the way they manipulate the court systems, and the way they manipulate the government itself, the state itself. And I don't think a lot of men get this, that women are more skillful manipulators than men are. I'm actually saying this as a warning. The consequence, in my opinion at least, the consequence that needs to be taken from this as a man is that you must be especially circumspect in your dealings with women on all levels. But God forbid you decide to some kind of romantic dalliance with a female, you need to be on guard. And I think the healthiest and best thing a man can do, quite frankly, is to maintain the default position of mistrust towards the human female. And this needs to be maintained indefinitely, with regards to her verbal communication, with regards to even her gestures, and certainly with regards to what she plainly and openly states as her intentions. You should not trust that. Who are the proponents always telling us that trust is the basis of every relationship? Based on, not my feeling, but what I've read over and over and over again, it's very often women who are making this statement. Tell men, you need to trust me, and the relationship cannot work without trust. It is essentially telling the man to drop his guard. Don't be as cautious. Don't be distrustful. You can trust me. Many men do that. I think it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea at all. I think it's downright dangerous in many ways. And of course, always remain aware that a woman will always put her own interests ahead of yours, and that she has no interest in you beyond that which you can do for her. If you actually feel content in that role, a thing of human doings, as many have said, as opposed to a human being, then remember that A, you will be manipulated, and B, those doings will be manipulated as well, and C, as soon as you can't do anymore, you will be done away with. And it certainly seems to be the case. Honor is the province of men. We are much more inclined to honor our debts, be they financially or the debts of friendship, the bonds of friendship. Women are creatures of duplicity. They are creatures that ride the wave. They are parasitic creatures. They have no sense of honor. They look at everything around them as a utility. Female creature is unaware of any concept of personhood because everything is a utility to her. It's a utility to promote her interests, to move her ahead, to garner her advantages. We are essentially fighting a war. There's no question about that. These are all their crowning achievements. Their duplicity, their ability to manipulate their lives. They're better at it because they're psychologically more sophisticated. Good for them. They can take their psychological sophistication and, twiddle their thumbs with it. And we can take our superior intellect and get the hell out of Dodge. That's my take on it. The fact is that we are the hosts and they are the parasites. The parasite needs the hosts. And the fact is that women, as a collective, would simply die off, and the vast majority would not be able to continue with their lives without men to lie to manipulate in order to garner resources.
I would argue that the fine distinction I'm making here between narcissism and solipsism is that the narcissist, in her worldview, or his or her worldview, to be PC, does acknowledge the personhood of others. It's just that they're inferior to him. Not so much with the solipsist. The solipsist doesn't view people as fully fleshed out persons. There's just sort of characters, like in a book or in a film. And so they lack that status of entityhood. They simply lack entity. They are not selves unto themselves. They are extensions, at best, of characters that would perhaps be in a drama. The narcissist does acknowledge the personhood of others. He or she simply thinks that they're just not really as good as he or she is. And I think that is the fine distinction. I think narcissism carries with it as well a streak of malice. And I do not attach or ascribe malice to female solipsism. I think it's very, very plausible that this is an evolutionary mechanism that has been hardwired into female psychology, quite possibly to survive past duress and past dangers. One of the key elements in my assessment of solipsism is not being aware of your own solipsism. And this is why women can, this is, I think, the explanation as to why women can, without remorse, without any of this, can get away, in some cases, quite literally with bloody murder. When people are not fully fleshed out, when they have no person status, when they lack entityhood, true being, it doesn't really matter what you do to them. This is to be differentiated, of course, from narcissism. I mean, the narcissist does acknowledge the existence of other people. He or she just thinks that they're beneath him. For all of us who've always wanted to know why it was that some of us were pining away for our exes, or at least took a long time to get over them, and why so many men commit suicide after relationships and marriages, and hardly a single woman does it, well, our answers might be found here. So I'm going to read this off. It's fairly short, and I will discuss it at length. I'm not a plagiarist, so full credit goes to Rollo Tomassi for this very, very insightful blog post. It's an angle of looking at female solipsism that I personally, I'm freely admitting here, had not considered to the extent that he had, and I think it is very, very valuable, and it's certainly noteworthy enough to talk about and comment on. So let's get started. Quote, evolution has largely selected for human females with the capacity to form psychological schemas that preserve an ego investment that would otherwise afflict them with debilitating anxiety, guilt, and the stresses that result from being continuously consciously aware of their own behavioral incongruities. Evolution selects for solipsistic women who are blissfully unaware of their solipsism. What I'm getting at here is suggesting that women's propensity for solipsism is a psychologically evolved mechanism. In other words, it helped women to cope with the harsh realities of the past, to develop a more focused sense of self-interest. To really grasp this, you need to understand women's brain function and chemistry. I'm not going to get too detailed in this, but suffice to say, numerous studies show that a female brain is hardwired for emotional response and communication on a more complex level than men. I think this is pretty much an established point for my readers, but if you disagree, well, that's going to have to be a topic of another post. And given the harsh realities that women had to endure since the Paleolithic era, it served them better to psychologically evolve a sense of self that was more resilient to the brutal changes she could expect to be subjected to. Consider the emotional investment a woman needs to put into mothering a child that could be taken away or killed at a moment's notice. Anxiety, fear, guilt, insecurity are all very debilitating emotions. However, it's women's innate psychology that makes them more durable to these stresses. Statistically, men have far greater difficulty in coping with psychological trauma, think PTSD, than women. Why should that be? On the face of it, you may think that men's better ability to rationally remove themselves from the emotional world makes them better at coping with psychological trauma, but the reverse is actually the case. Women seem to have a better ability to accept emotional sacrifice and move on, either ignoring those stresses or blocking them entirely from their conscious awareness. Women possessing a more pronounced empathetic capacity undoubtedly served our species in nurturing young and understanding tribal social dynamics. However, it was also a liability with regards to a hostile change in our environment. Stockholm syndrome is far more pronounced in female captives. Why should that be? Because women's peripheral environment dictated the need to develop psychological mechanisms to help them survive. It was the women who could make that emotional disconnect when the circumstances necessitated, who survived and lived to breed with their tribes when their tribes were decimated by a superior force. This is also known as the war bride dynamic. Women develop an empathy with their conquerors by necessity. Men are the disposable sex, women the preserved sex. Men would simply die in favor of a superior aggressor, but women would be reserved for breeding. So it served a feminine imperative to evolve an ability to cut form emotional ties more readily in favor of a new captor and focus on a more self-important psychology, solipsism. Now here's where I'll step off the diving board and into the theoretical. It's my purview that a whole lot of what men would complain are duplicitous acts of indifference towards them are really rooted in this innate feminine solipsism. That's a bold statement, I realize. But I'd argue that what men take for inconsiderate indifference is that in a breakup or in ruthless shit tests is really a woman tapping into this innate self-preserving solipsism. Combine hypergamy with the chronically hostile environments of the past, and you end up with a modern-day feminine solipsism. Add to this an acculturated sense of female entitlement, social conventions that excuse this quote-unquote duplicity, and a constant misdirection of intent by women themselves, and you come to where we are now. As if that weren't enough, throw in the element of hypergamy and the countdown in terms of fertility and long-term provisioning that a woman must deal with before hitting the imminent wall, and wall is capitalized, and now you have a further picture of the conditions and stresses that necessitate the solipsistic nature. Ever wonder why a woman can get over you so quickly after a breakup from a relationship that you thought was rock solid for so long? Ever wonder why she returns to the abusive boyfriend she hopes will change for her? Look no further than female solipsism. After reading all this, I can understand if anyone thinks this is a very nihilistic observation. Let me be clear, this dynamic is real by order of degrees for individual women. A woman's conditions may be such that she's never needed to tap into this reserve. Also, we are dealing with subconscious elements of her personality here. So it would come as no surprise that feminine solipsism wouldn't be cognitive for most women, thus offensive and denied. I'm not asking that anyone accept this idea as gospel, just that the dots do connect very predictably, and that's the end of it.
Neoteny is a biological phenomenon, simply defined as the retention or prolongation of traits in adults that are normally associated with children. Neoteny is extremely prevalent in the human female. Over time and uncounted generations, evolution selected for neotenous features in the human female because, for whatever reason, Human males express their preference for neotenous females in offering their labor, provision, and resources to this group, as opposed to females with fewer neotenous features, and mating with them, thus providing increased chances of greater neoteny in female offspring, and raising highly neotenous features to be a standard that is now effectively the standard across the globe, irrespective of culture or country when it comes to the preferences of men in choosing mates. Since neoteny on its own is a purely biological phenomenon, it will likely have given birth to social phenomena related to it, inasmuch as a biological phenomenon is the precursor to a social and cultural phenomenon by dint of simple precedents. We are also aware of hypoagency, a term I coined a while back to describe women's seeming unwillingness or inability to effect changes upon the world directly, often working through proxy agents, i.e. men. Hypoagency is also clearly a derivative of selective pressures in the past, when the environment our ancestors lived in was radically different to the current one, and the average male's superior strength, as an example, put him in what was essentially a caretaker role to the female. And because we had lived in such a harsh environment that likely required such a setup for far longer than the current one of comfort extraordinaire, this phenomenon of hypoagency has become ingrained in the human psyche, both in the female, in her perception of herself, and male perception of women. Men had, for millennia, been exposed to constant stress, duress, and violent death, and women had been, to the extent that it was possible, spared of most of that. And unsurprisingly, this pattern continues today, since we are all still running on 20,000-year-old software. Children are not endowed with a sense of responsibility. This must be learnt and acquired. And responsibility to others can only be acquired if otherhood itself is something that has legitimately been acknowledged. Consider female entitlement. Children feel entitled because all they know are their needs and wants. They know no differently, and unfortunately, in many cases, the same can be said of women. The disgruntled wife who divorces on a whim, demanding payment from the hard-working husband, taking his children away, is no different because neither the husband nor the children are independent entities. Indeed, how often do we hear women speak in almost symbiotic terms of the child growing in their wombs? The husband owes her the money because that is what she wants. The children are extensions of herself, and thus there is no question of custody. And neither is it different in the case of the female who maintains a quote-unquote serious relationship with one man who provides her with financial services and gifts, and simultaneously keeps a lover on the side to service her sexual needs. A person possessed of a solipsistic worldview does not need to justify or rationalize any of this, since everything outside the self is there to serve the self, as is the case with a child. Remorse, regret, guilt, these feelings are foreign, and wrongdoing can easily be broken down into the simplistic formula of, quote, does it make me feel good or does it not, end quote.
By commitment, I believe at least, in gyno speak, women are referring to a term or concept whereby the man essentially shackles himself to the woman and does her bidding. I think commitment is essentially a euphemistic term for servility, and maybe I would go so far as to say slavery, a kind of domestic slavery. And the reason why I say that is because it's clear that when a woman speaks of commitment, she desires the man to subordinate himself, his desires, and to submit to her wishes and desires, and to submit himself to her, whereby she is the priority in every respect. That is really what commitment boils down to. But let's talk about the term commitment phobe. Now, it's very obvious that this is a shaming term. Why in gyno speak do they use this term? Well, first off, he has a phobia, so he's afraid. So there's the fear. It's a negative term. He's fearful, and he doesn't want to commit. He doesn't want to join in this wonderful bonding and what have you. Commitment phobe, it's claimed, The reason why they don't want to commit is so they can have sex with multiple partners. In very few cases, this is actually the case. Whether there are men going their own way or not, at least in an active manner, they don't want to commit for a very different reason, for several different reasons. But I think the actual interpretation of the term commitment phobe is probably closer to liberty lover or freedom lover, someone who prizes his own freedom and his autonomy over that of subordination and self-abasement and self-imposed slavery towards the will of another, towards the will of the vaginally endowed. The term is a shaming term, and it's negative because that's how women, well, and mangines and others, but essentially women, score points and make men feel bad because men, in some cases, refuse to do their bidding and execute their will. And so the commitment phobe, of course, is one such man. He is someone who's chosen to go his own way, in the vast majority of cases, not so he can have sex with multiple partners, but simply because he values his freedom, his autonomy, and he doesn't want to subordinate himself to someone who has respect for none of those things. Let's turn the tables here for a little bit, and let's consider the concept of a female commitment phobe. But we don't use that term for females, do we? When a woman doesn't want to be in a relationship or wants to go on her own, tackle the world on her own, she is a strong, independent woman, someone to be admired. When a man does that, he's a loner, a loser, and a commitment phobe. So we see, of course, as usual, the double standard. And so it is the expectation put upon men to engage in so-called commitment, and self-abasement and slavery towards the woman. So ultimately, commitment is nothing else than slavery. It is a form of subordination and total subordination. Remember, because the man's wishes in a relationship really don't count. To the extent that the man can fulfill the woman's wishes, she might throw him a bone or what have you, just like a dog, essentially. That's how he's treated. And fuck the manginas who concede to it and acquiesce to it. And yeah, then we should all continue being commitment phobes, because to my mind, it's a noble thing, the desire to maintain your autonomy, keep up your freedom, and to resist what essentially is tyranny at the end of the day. It is the tyranny of the many, and I do mean many, many, many. In order to properly gauge the merits of female partnership, we can make use of the apt analogy of the job seeker, the employer, and the CV. The job description is as follows: caring, generous, nurturing, reliable, and trustworthy. I use this description because it corresponds to the mythology attributed to women in relationships. The employer is the male, and he must examine the job applicant's CV in detail so as to come to a conclusion about the soundness of employing her. Examining women and female behavior through the lens of both history and modernity allows us to properly read their metaphorical CV. Analogous to the academic and job-related qualifications, we have the historical track record of women spanning untold millennia. The human female evolved the tools to fully optimize her own direct survival and that of her direct offspring. The entirety of female psychology is built around this evolution, and everything women do, in large measure, can be reduced to this and only this. The best tool she had at her disposal were the resources, intellectual, physical, financial, emotional, of men. And the female has been equipped, both physically and mentally, with the tools to take hold of male resources in an effort to improve her own lot, more specifically, to acquire security, protection for herself and her direct offspring. That is her primary interest. If that is her primary interest, then the male will be, by necessity, at best, a very useful tool, with a determinable and fixed utility expiration date, invariably brought about by the acquisition on the part of the female of a quote-unquote superior model, or still worse, something the existence of which is given no regard whatsoever, i.e. trash. In the past, the best survival strategy for the female was optimal male resource extraction without regard for his well-being. A careful look at the human female's metaphorical academic qualifications will reveal that she has, in fact, a BSc, an MSc, and a PhD in male resource extraction without concern for said male. This is the training that women have received throughout millennia, and the training and qualifications each man should be aware of in appraising the female in her application for the job of, quote, partner. It is utter foolishness to believe that social and biological behavioral patterns that have been hardwired into the female can be reverse engineered by education or persuasion, no matter how cogent the argumentation. The question rightly arises from all of this as to whether or not men are as beholden to their biology with respect to behavior as women are, and it must sadly be stated that the majority of them indeed are. Men have always and continue to compete in what is termed the dominance hierarchy, wherein individual men compete against each other in an effort to gain status in order to attract prospective females. The question is, why is dominance hierarchy competition unhealthy? The first problem with dominance hierarchy competition, and the problem from which all the others stem, is the objective. Competition occurs not to better oneself or to improve one's abilities for oneself or to help one's fellow men, but to pursue women. Quote-unquote successful competitors are then scrutinized by females who use their congenital, instinctual, hypergamous instincts to assess said competitors. This process pits men against men in a similar fashion to war. Men, then, are very willing to inflict harm, bodily and otherwise, upon their fellow men in an effort to garner female favor. In answer to the question, is men's behavior dictated by their biology as much as that of females, in light of the evidence we have at hand and of the destructive dominance hierarchy competition, I'm sad to say that it is. It is claimed that when men fail and suffer in their relationships, it is entirely their fault, because they were not cautious and careful enough when assessing their female partners, discounting the very open fact that men for decades have been fed lies, fairy tales, and outright mythology concerning the nature of females, and yet the responsibility lies squarely with the male, or so it is claimed. Here we can once again observe the phenomenon of female hypoagency rearing its ugly head. Women did not do it, it was the man's choice. If he suffered, it was a consequence of his choices, and it's entirely his responsibility. And yet, when men decide to consciously go their own way, in an act of recognition and acknowledgement, and a reaction to the deception fed to them, they are accused of being closed-minded, weak, rigid, and any number of other shame-related words by the opposition, and indeed by those who would claim to be our allies. Another closely linked deflection is the appeal to female nature deflection, often reduced to, it's not her fault, that's just how women are. Once again, no responsibility. And when we men correctly assess and internalize female nature, and turn our backs on it, we are called extreme. I'll give you an example. If a large predatory animal were attacking you, you would have the right to defend yourself, even though said animal might merely be following its instincts. Maybe it's hungry, and maybe that's the reason it's attacking you. It doesn't matter. Likewise with women. In recognizing female nature, we reserve the right to reject that nature as dangerous and harmful to men, and we reserve the right to practice our own form of defense, which is our turning our backs to it and walking away. Let me ask you honestly, how much intermasculine conflict do you believe there would be if females were not present, and if females were not showing their stuff off to men, presenting their goods? I dare claim there would be much, much less conflict, perhaps none whatsoever. Until it is understood that the female lies at the fulcrum of all of our issues, and more specifically, that her congenital gift of the uterus drives us down the cycle of male competition and violence, and internecine conflict amongst ourselves, we must discuss and illuminate female nature. It's unavoidable. Female reproductive privilege is the driving force behind all of this, and I do mean all of it. Much as the Federal Reserve in the United States seeks to maintain a stranglehold on the dollar and indeed all currencies, banning competing currencies, so too do females along with their male henchmen desire to ban reproductive competition in the form of male birth control, and still more in the form of artificial womb technology, thereby ensuring that the millennial competition and conflict amongst men is further perpetuated, and forever trapping us within the cyclic nature of history. To counter this, the force of choice must be introduced. Men can and shall have the option in the future to either pair with a female and engage in natural procreation, ensuring the cycle of unhealthy male competition, or opting for the artificial womb, decoupling the female from her sole source of power and influence, and thereby forcing her to develop genuine qualities and helpful skills, and also liberating men from a cycle of violence committed for the sake of females and against each other since time immemorial. Women are constant manipulators, and the fact is that so much of what women do comes down to deception, and in particular their relations to men and how they deal with us revolves around deception, lies, manipulation. The consequence of this is not a destruction of our innate moral character as men, but certainly a hardening. Maybe there happens to be a female that has legitimately suffered. It's not that I would not feel compassion towards that individual, but the fact is, you don't know these days which woman is lying, who's telling the truth, who's not. It just seems there's just so much fabrication. And this hardening has been brought about by feminism and women's lies and deception. I try to be an ethical person. I try to help people if I can. But I've been suckered into, in the past, so often into believing female was suffering when she was in fact not. It took me a while to realize the female crocodile tears are really just a means of manipulation. There are so many. Nagging, for example, is another one. And this hardening has occurred in me, and I've seen it occur in a good deal of my friends as well. At some point in time, it has to occur. You just don't know. And since women see men merely as a utility, as a resource to get things done, to affect her will, as a tool, it's also hard to know if and when a female is using her manipulative powers through the pretense of pain and suffering to have a man execute her will. I'd venture to guess it's probably impossible to say. Suffice to say, what I've said before remains the default position, that of mistrust. Better to be safe than sorry. And once again, we come back to the position of this hardening, that we become, rightly so, reluctant to display kindness because we don't know what we're dealing with. We simply cannot identify legitimate cases of suffering, of pain, of women in genuine need. All too often, it's simply not the case, and sometimes that's very overt, just total BS. And sometimes it's not, but we have been put in this position, and it actually is the only tenable, only reasonable position to be in, given the circumstances, in my humble opinion. We cannot swallow the blue pill again, although the one character, the traitor, he wants to take the blue pill again and just forget everything. But that's not even a possibility, and there's no going back. So all the knowledge that we possess about what we're up against and our position in the world, not even society, in the world throughout the ages, essentially as cheap slave labor with no inherent value beyond what we can do for others, be it be sent off to die in a war against other men that never done anything to us, or to simply live your life out as a worker drone, performing deeds for a faceless society that doesn't give a shit or a rat's ass about your well-being. We can't go back to not seeing that. And one of the consequences of that, once again, is this hardening, that we have withdrawn our support and our desire to support with the enemy out there. We don't even know what we're dealing with. A few women out there who are actually legitimately suffering. As more and more men in the world and in society, more and more men you encounter withdraw and have become morally hardened, as it were, and you lose their empathy and their sympathy and their support. You don't need to look to the men. Look to your fellow women. Look to the feminists. They've created this toxic atmosphere Feminism is a extension of that self-serving nature, and so everything is a tool to feminism to promote an agenda of making sure they keep their power and their level of comfort. If you suffer legitimately as a woman, make no mistake, feminists will take advantage of that. She's not going to offer you legitimate compassion. She will use you as a great example in an effort to produce more propaganda for the purpose of society-wide manipulation. So feminism, in many ways, is the epitome of that self-serving, manipulative female nature. We saw this men who weren't willing to just throw their lives away for the sake of so-called women and children on a sinking ship. We're not going to do that anymore because we know you don't value it. And we know you don't give a shit about it. We're not going to fucking throw our lives away just because you think that's the right thing to do. Now, I've thought of a metaphor and analogy for NAWALT and for this whole ludicrous nonsense about you need to be more careful, you need to be more circumspect, and no doubt, in general in life, you need to be circumspect. But somehow ultimately the blame lies on my shoulders, and indeed on all of my fellow men's shoulders. Well, the analogy I like to think of is when someone says NAWALT, and if a heterosexual man were to perceive a woman as a extremely nutritious and I'm not saying this is necessarily true, but let's say this is our perception of what woman is based on our biological instinct. Nutritious fruit or berry with an incredible amount of nutrients, vitamins, a great amino acid profile, and everything you could possibly want in a form of sustenance. And it is, to begin with, a rare berry, so it's very difficult to find. And this berry only grows underneath nettle plants. Now, for those of you who might not know what a nettle are, these plants with these sort of razor-sharp thorns and leaves. The analogy I'm trying to make is you have this field with these berries, and everywhere you want to look, it's covered in nettles, and inevitably, you're probably going to cut yourself. What's more, beyond the nettles, most of these berries are not only rare, but there's a species of berries that's nearly identical in appearance to it, and it's highly poisonous and toxic. In any given field, I'll be generous, 99% of those berries will be the imitation berry, the toxic one. And you might have 1% of the highly nutritious, highly sought-after berry that will provide all the nutrients for your sustenance, buried underneath a never-ending series of nettles. Well, that's pretty much what the odds are with regards to women, if I'm being generous. And so that is what the blame game deflection comes down to, is that instead of realizing that the field is covered in rather dangerous and abrasive nettles, and that this imitation species berry is everywhere you look, is it statistically probable that you're going to find the highly sought-after berry that will give you all the nutrients and sustain you? No, probably not. In fact, very, very unlikely if you just look at it statistically. And yet, we hear all the time, it is your fault. You need to be more selective. You need to be more careful, more circumspect. And it really is, particularly when talking to women, although you hear it unfortunately from men as well, a never-ending series of deflections. And NAWALT is simply just one of them. But they have several things in common. They're vacuous, that is, they lack real content, and they explain nothing. If you ask a woman, for example, let's take for granted that your so-called explanation, not all women are like that, is accurate. Why are some women like that then? And I say some to some extent to smooth things over to the extent where I can actually have a discussion, which is almost impossible anyway. The explanation I got a few times I mentioned is that because you, that is the man, is looking for that type of woman, so it is ultimately your fault. There is never, and I repeat, never an examination of why the women themselves are behaving this way. Are there societal forces at work? Are there biological forces at work? Are there sociological forces at work? All converging on one point to create what one could only describe as a monstrosity. Of course not. You're the guy, you're the man, it's your fault. And so I have to think and say that maybe it's not even worth talking to women about this. I'm not even talking about feminists, I'm just talking about your average woman who refuses to acknowledge her privilege, who doesn't want to have a rational discussion. Well, since when do women... This is a conclusion I have come to. that it simply does not matter what you say. If you want to have a rational discussion and talk about details about anything. Now, let's reverse this just briefly. If we're talking about a woman, I highly doubt that she'll be told either by her girlfriends or even by men that it's her fault. No, then you go to the so-called generalization, the generalizations which aren't very testable in actual reality, but never mind that. Men are pigs, men are this, men are violent. He didn't respect you enough. How often have you heard that? He didn't respect you enough because he didn't want to buy you XYZ jewelry or take you out to a fancy dinner. So you see where this is going. Women are not interested in explanation. They're also not particularly interested in how things work for the most part. So this is, I think, an extension of that. They don't want to understand why things are the way they are. And so they employ these deflections. These are my final thoughts on NAWALT. Let's look at NAWALT logically. NAWALT standing for not all women are like that. If you look at it in terms of formal logic, if NAWALT, not all women are like that, therefore some women must be like that, because not all women that are like that implies some women are like that. The frequency of which this excuse is offered, then you quickly arrive at many women are like that. There's a direct correspondence to that. So the fact that not all women are like that, as they like to claim, implies the further fact that some women are like that, and the frequency with which this excuse is given, this deflection, gives further implication of many women indeed are like that. Are there exceptions? Well, there are always needles in the pan-dimensional haystack, as it were. The final point being that NAWALT has no explicative power. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't, in particular, answer why, at the very, very least, and I'm being beyond generous, some women are indeed like that. It is a deflection because it doesn't explain anything. That is the problem with NAWALT. You have a woman who basically just tells you women marry for money and for resources, and it's their right, and it's the proper thing to do. With a plethora of women underneath signing comments and rebuffing the men who say, oh, that's disgusting behavior, and so on and so forth. The point of marriage is to give women money. That's why you get married, right? It's not to make the man happy, give him a sense of satisfaction from having a family, a sense of accomplishment, any self-respect. It's to give women money. It's very clear. It's obvious. In fact, the woman says it. Sadly, there are men, apparently, who have money, who believe that women actually are interested in who they are as opposed to what they can do for them. I want to talk a little bit about Briffault's law, something I think that every man should know about, extremely, extremely important. All men should know about it. It's probably, when dealing with women, the single most important thing you can know as a man. Briffault's law states, the female, not the male, determines all the conditions of the animal family. Where the female can derive no benefit from association with the male, no such association takes place. Corollary 1. Past benefit provided by the male does not provide for continued or future association. Corollary 2. Any agreement where the male provides a current benefit in return for a promise of future association is null and void as soon as the male has provided the benefit. See Corollary 1. 3. A promise of future benefit has limited influence on current/future association, with the influence inversely proportionate to the length of time until the benefit will be given, and directly proportionate to the degree to which the female trusts the male. And then in brackets, which is not bloody likely. We as men have a concept of commitment of debt. If someone, even if I don't like the person, if someone does something for me, I do feel in some sense obligated to discharge, at the very least, discharge that debt. The female feels no such compunction. That means that even if a male has provided for her well-being for 10 years, and for whatever reasons, perhaps he falls ill, or he has an injury, or it doesn't matter what the reasons are, although certainly being ill and injured is a good reason, would be a logical reason, she will not continue her association with it. Why? Because he's no longer providing the benefit. But rest assured, and do not doubt, that a woman will only associate with a male based on the benefit she potentially sees in him. Loyalty, honor, gratitude, and duty are male values that we men project on women, but which very few to no women actually possess. And make no mistake, you have never been and never will be part of what is hers. What are hers will be first herself, then her biological children, then her parents, then her siblings, and then the rest of her blood relatives. The biological imperative has always been to extend her bloodline. It stops there and it always will. This is true everywhere in the world. Get over it. This can be saddening, and indeed it is, to me at least. But these are the facts, unfortunately. That is how the female operates. Relationship, according to Briffault's law, and you don't even need that to see that, is simply a business transaction. Most of the time, the man is paying for sex and perhaps access to reproduction in exchange for his financial resources, money, things he can buy, and level of comfort provided to the woman. She might simply enjoy the attention, this is very common, lavished upon her by Bob. She might enjoy his servitude, his willingness to essentially get down on the knees and take it up the ass, metaphorically speaking. So there are a lot of ways to interpret benefit. Benefit need not necessarily be just money. That should be clear. And it's often, I mention this and I want to stress this because so many men are willing to overlook that. Oh, she's not into my money, so she's not a superficial or person or what have you. At the end of the day, she will be looking for some kind of benefit. In some ways, the financial transaction benefit is most transparent and the easiest to deal with. What I would suggest, what I think might be wise, is if a man chooses to enter into a relationship well, let's just say relationship, marriage is, we know what marriage is about, then the man should, prior to entering the relationship, be aware of what the benefit is to the female. Once again, if it's cut and dry, if it's just an issue of finances, let's say the man has money, then it's pretty clear what the female is looking for. And consequently, as long as he can provide for her financially, he'll have most likely continued access to her vagina or whatever else he might seek from her. In some cases, one benefit seen in one man outweighs the other, or it could be a combination of benefits. Remember, women are always looking for one leg up. They're looking for a way to improve their situations. And so if they see a man who can provide a better benefit, rest assured you will be chucked out the door, out the window. There's no doubt about that. This cannot be stressed enough, and I apologize if it's repetitive. Remember, you have no humanity, no personhood in the eyes of a woman. You are merely a tool. You are merely a utility. That is your only purpose, is to serve her interests. And she is willing to give you sex in return, perhaps some feigned motherly sense of comfort at best. But all those quote-unquote gifts, or rather the services rendered for the contract, will cease to be once she finds someone else who can provide a better benefit. Maybe she'll even cuckold. Maybe she'll have children with that guy, and you take care of them because you're the good father. Potentially, if you're not a father, but you see my point.
Quote, half of all women would lie to their husbands or partners to keep their relationship going if they became pregnant by another man, a survey said today. Figures showed 1 woman in 2 would not tell her man that the baby she was carrying was not his if she wanted him to stay. They also said 4 out of 10, 42%, would lie about contraception in order to get pregnant in spite of the wishes of their partner. The new survey of women's attitudes to truth, relationships, and behavior said the overwhelming majority, 96%, admit to lying. So, right there, 42% of the survey samples taken, those Mancunian women would lie to their partners about contraception to trick him in order to get pregnant, in order to keep him, for example, in spite of the wishes of their partner. Women have no restraint about lying, deceiving. They'll do it. They don't care about the consequences. They don't care what happens to the man. They're thinking only about their own wishes. One of my subscribers sent me an article depicting a situation in Nova Scotia and Canada whereby the gentleman poked holes in the condom he was using whilst having intercourse with his girlfriend, and she became pregnant. This man as well, in this particular individual case, he was only thinking about his own wishes, and yet he's being charged with sexual assault and thrown in jail for 1.5 years. In the UK, in the United States, and in Canada apparently as well, it's that kind of behavior on the part of women is not considered criminal. It's barely even frowned upon. It's thought of perhaps of being in poor taste at best. Yet the man did the exact same thing in this case, and he's being charged with sexual assault and 18 months of imprisonment. We often speak of equality under the law. Well, where's the equality under the law now? The guy did exactly the same thing as thousands, if not millions of women on a daily basis across the world do. Surreptitiously get off the pill in order to get pregnant. However you swing it, if you want equality under the law, either this man did commit sexual assault, in which case 42% of those Mancunian women that were surveyed have or are willing to commit sexual assault as well as women who have in fact committed sexual assault in this way by lying, secretly getting off the pill in a deceitful act of betrayal. Or it's not. I mean, it's simply something frowned upon. This guy should not be charged with any criminal activity, either or. In a world which actually would strive for equality under law and justice, either way, it would be just one outcome. You wouldn't have, well, women can get off the pill and trick their men into getting pregnant and then entrap them, but this guy, he's a man, so we're going to get him. We're going to charge him with sexual assault, and we're going to throw him in prison for 18 months. There are so many women out there who are willing to deceive their partners and get pregnant against partners' wishes. I cannot tell you the number of stories that I hear from subscribers, from people I game with, from men across the world, across the globe, in Japan, right? Where the woman seduces him or gets him drunk or however you want to imagine it, every possibility. And then a couple of weeks or months later, gets a phone call, well, I'm pregnant, I have your kid. I mean, this is horrific behavior. I mean, I think ultimately it should be considered criminal behavior, so this man should be punished. However, all the other women should be punished as well. You don't do this. Of course, in the article, it's claimed that women, of course, bear greater consequences for a pregnancy. Well, maybe for the first 9 months. But after that, she's going to be getting all the man's money for at least 18 years. So, well, I don't know if they take that aspect of the equation into account. But there's nothing criminal about a woman telling a man that she's taking contraception of some sort, the pill. And in fact, when she's not, and he trusts her, ejaculates in her, she becomes pregnant, and he has a baby all of a sudden on his hands that he didn't even want to begin with. I mean, that is just a horrific act of deception. You know? And this is why things like the male pill or real male contraception, not just the Jimmy, not just the condom, are really critical. I mean, in the future, if we live to see it, these kinds of innovations, because that will give men true influence and true power. I mean, no woman will be able to trick a man ever again. And I think men will be far more responsible in that regard, because when that happens, if it happens, men will be able to take the decision, I want a child now or not, and there will have to be consent on his part, because he cannot be forced in that case unless the woman sabotages his own birth control. But it's always his responsibility, even though women these days have 100% means of controlling whether or not they get pregnant. I mean, they have at least a dozen means of birth control. The chip they implant in their arm, they have diaphragms, they have the conventional anti-baby pill. The list goes on, and all a man has is getting his tubes cut or, the condom. The tubes cut, okay, but I mean, that's a serious operation. It's not nearly as easy as just popping a pill, despite what women claim. Once again, not really a fan of news stories, but kind of interesting story just cropped up. So apparently, in Florida, a 28-year-old son of a fertility doctor has been charged with murder by switching the label of a bottle of pills that his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend was taking, which brought about a essentially involuntary abortion. I think the fetus was 6 weeks old or something. And the interesting thing is that he's being charged, he's put up on federal charges of murder. For the record, I technically support abortion, technically speaking, but I also support the right of the man to opt out. Let's just look at the dynamic here. Ultimately, it seems to be a question of opinion and a question of context as to whether or not a woman considers the fetus in her
womb a life or not. If she desires to have the fetus and to bear it forth as a fully fledged human being, then it's a life. If she doesn't, it's just a fetus. I'm not going to get into the debate whether or not it actually is a life at 6 weeks or not. I think it's very relevant here. And I'm certainly not going to defend the rather horrific and monstrous machinations of the boyfriend who slipped her with the essentially abortion pill. But this is a slippery slope. It's kind of just an arbitrary designation depending on the context of whether a life is life or not. If you hit a car with a pregnant woman and say the fetus dies, you can get charged for murder, accident or not, depending on the state, as far as I know, or that might be federal as well. This is a big problem. But what's the solution to solve the problem here? It's pretty simple, actually. The solution to solve the problem is to allow men to opt out. Now, what the guy did, it goes without saying, was horrific, but he adamantly did not want to have the child. Now, I don't know if he was concerned about being put up for child support or what have you, but the simple fact is that the problem itself would be solved without even needing to define what's a life and what's not a life and under what circumstances, if men simply had the option to opt out, to sign a piece of paper and say, I will have nothing to do with this child, it has no, barring my genetic relationship, to no relationship to him whatsoever, that's it, and he's gone. And the woman takes the child on her own as her responsibility, and that's it. Simple solution. Whether the fetus is life or not, it's not really relevant. What really is relevant is the father has no agency. He has no choice. He has no freedom of association. His freedom of association with the child is determined by the mother. If he doesn't want to associate, it doesn't matter, because she tells him whether or not he can associate. If he does, it doesn't matter, because she tells him he cannot associate with the child. Very simple solution, ladies and gentlemen. Let the father have a say in it, either to say yay or nay, no, I don't want anything to do with the child, or yes, I do want to have something to do with it. Very simple. I don't see why this is such a problem, unless the society we live in is pretty misandric, unless the entire world and our civilization, particularly modern civilization, is infused with a kind of super hyper-gynocentrism.
Topic being male contraception, the male pill. Now, before we go ahead to the political aspects of this, traditionally, male contraception, if you look at it just a scientific problem, the issue has always been a hormonal one. That is, the only way you can effectively make a male temporarily infertile is to do something with his testosterone levels. This generally doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because you lose your libido and there are other potentially negative health effects. So it's not good to mess with the body's own testosterone production. This doctor, through many decades of rigorous research into the field, the area of male reproduction, male contraception, eventually came across something what appears to be cottonseed, properties of cottonseed, that increase libido and at the same time render a male temporarily infertile. You'd think this would be one of the discoveries of the century. Very simple. Apparently it's been tested on many thousands of people as well. Very safe, in addition to being very effective. It's only temporary. According to him, after about 3 months, your fertility would return. Not available, but we have a male pill, a male contraceptive. Those are the medical and scientific aspects of it. Unfortunately, in large measure because of feminists, women, and pharmaceutical industries, let's not forget the pharmaceutical industrial complex, science and medicine, whilst able to work within its own sphere, doesn't always have an outlet because of these external political forces. That's an issue. The doctor telling that when he was at a congress, I believe in the late 80s, in communist Budapest in Hungary, there was controlled opposition, ranting, shouting, protestations, coming from feminists. Now, it shouldn't be a secret to anyone who's in the know, anyone who is a man going his own way, or any man in the men's rights movement, that women would be fundamentally opposed to any idea of birth control. Most men, particularly men who are still chasing after a vagina, would love the option to be able to just ejaculate and not worry about the pregnancy issue. No consequences, I suppose. The issue here, very importantly, is the simple fact that women want control. The simple fact is that the true power of a female has always been, again, remains to be until that changes, is her reproduction, her ability to produce children, her uterus. But what if you were to empower men with the ability to make decisions about their own reproduction, reproductive rights, about their own ability to dispense sperm or not, about their own desire to inseminate or not? What happens to the vortex of female power in that context? I would say it dwindles, and rather rapidly, if not vanishes. By giving men the ability to control their own reproduction, essentially, you would effectively decouple women from their rather lofty positions of power. Because all of those positions of power, whatever their derivatives might be, the ultimate derivative, the ultimate source of that power is their uterus, their ability to reproduce, their access to their own means of birth control, and all the consequences that follow from that. What are some of those consequences? Some of them are, for example, the ability to trick a man into getting her pregnant, the ability to, on the other opposite end of the spectrum, to claim that she wants to get pregnant when the man is trying to found a family, let's say, and in fact not get pregnant. There are many, many aspects of this, but it all comes from this one unique ability to bear children. So much opposition to that. We really see so clearly what women want and what they don't want. They don't want men to have any autonomy and control over their lives. They want men to remain and continue to be dependent on women and women's sole means of controlling reproduction. That's what they want. Why wouldn't they give men access as well to the so-called pill? Well, if they did, men would have a lot more control. Mind you, not all control would be lost because men would still chase after female orifices like they always used to. But some of the most critical things, in particular regarding alimony and being thrown in jail for child support, I mean, that would be, you would have a lot more control over stuff like that. There would no longer be unwanted pregnancies. Oh, I didn't know I got pregnant. Things along those lines. Why don't we have access to a pill? It's not because they haven't come up with something along those lines. It's because the women don't want us to have access to a pill. Now, every man in such a situation would decide for himself whether he wants to take the thing. But the point is, according to the doctor, it seems pretty safe, doesn't have any negative health effects, no effects on the liver, and so on and so forth. So what's the problem? It's political in nature. In particular, women don't want men to take the pill, even though the pill is out there. Proof is in the pudding, folks.
After some reflection, I've come to realize that, biological origins of human sexual behavior notwithstanding, there exists enough evidence to suggest that it can be understood as easily in economic terms as it can be using any other means of analysis, and indeed, approaching the male-female relationship from the context of supply and demand allows for a possible new insight, at least in a highly theoretical, if not improbable sense, on what could come into being to fundamentally alter a behavioral dynamic that has been relatively static for untold millennia. In the same sense, Briffault's law can be seen as not only descriptive, but also carrying economic force and weight, that Briffault's law and the extensions I will add to it are in fact reflective of what one might refer to as laws of supply and demand, and that the reproductive game is just that as well. But first, it would behoove us to recall what Briffault's law actually is, as well as the corollaries to the law suggested by Stickman. I have mentioned in the past that Briffault's law, namely that the female, not the male, determines all the conditions of the animal family, where the female can derive no benefit from association with the male, no such association takes place, is simply put none other than a description of a very basic biological business contract. After all contracts are drawn up in order to attain some benefit to the parties involved. Usually both parties are aware of the conditions in the contract and both seek benefit in equal measure. The corollaries produced by stickmen, in fact, are further stipulations in the contract accessible to only the female party. 1. Past benefit provided by the male does not provide for continued or future association. 2. Any agreement where the male provides a current benefit in return for a promise of future association is null and void as soon as the male has provided the benefit. See Corollary 1. And 3. A promise of future benefit has limited influence on current future association, with the influence inversely proportionate to the length of time until the benefit will be given and directly proportionate to the degree to which the female trusts the male. The corollaries are stipulations based on female input, and she will likely act upon them more often than not. And moreover, and more importantly, these stipulations are based on perception of value attributed to the female, and perception in general will be an important factor to consider in this video. Now, a common counter-argument is that it is not just women, but men who seek to gain benefits from entering into a relationship, that no one, male or female, enters into a relationship with the idea of being disadvantaged. So goes the argument. And unsurprisingly, you'll get no argument from me on this one. The distinction between male and female benefit-seeking is not to be found in generalized statements and counter-arguments such as the aforementioned, but rather in the nitty-gritty details of the contract itself, and more importantly in the laws of supply and demand, which have equal jurisprudence over the human animal as they do over more conventional market products and services. What then are the laws of supply and demand? Law number 1. If demand increases and supply remains unchanged, a shortage occurs, leading to a higher equilibrium price. Law 2. If demand decreases and supply remains unchanged, a surplus occurs, leading to a lower equilibrium price. Law number 3. If demand remains unchanged and supply increases, a surplus occurs, leading to a lower equilibrium price. And 4. If demand remains unchanged and supply decreases, a shortage occurs, leading to a higher equilibrium price. If we observe carefully, we will see that for most of human history, only the first law has actually been applicable to the human female, and the second law has been the primary determinant of the human male as of this current date. In fact, it has effectively been a static state of affairs for millions of years. What specifically am I referring to? I am, of course, making reference to the reproductive roles, the services, if you will, conferred upon women and men respectively by biology. Here it is not a question of actual numbers of men and women, but rather a question of function, where the woman represents the limiting factor in reproduction, possessing a uterus, confers high demand and low supply, where supply is based upon the fact that only one woman can become pregnant at any given time, and is then burdened with that pregnancy for a period of 9 months, and that without such a female service, the species could, at least potentially, go extinct. The man, on the contrary, can potentially inseminate thousands of women, meaning his services are of low demand and in high supply, the exact opposite of the female's market status. The primary distinction between actual market supply and demand in a society of available goods is that this status for both men and women has been relatively static, unchanging, and is almost entirely a consequence of biological realities, which is why law number 1 has remained applicable to human females since humans entered the terrestrial scene, and why 1 has never really been applied to human males, and 2 has been the primary descriptor of the human male market value with little change. That is to say that more or less, perceptually, the female, by way of her uterus, has been in high demand with little change to supply, and the male likewise has been in low demand with little change to his supply. 3 and 4 of the laws are only theoretically possible within the framework of human sexual biology, and could only become valid through intervening technology, something I will return to later in this video. If my observations are correct, and human biological goods can be mapped onto a loose form of supply and demand law, then we also have a powerful explicator for the general trends of male and female behavior in the reproductive arena, and a possible basis for breaking the static nature of that behavior if means were to be found to directly change the flow of reproductive market goods. Of course, I am talking about what amounts to a perpetual female monopoly being the only bearer of children. This monopoly has created a distortion in supply and demand brought about through perception. This occurs when something as simple as childbearing is perceived to be of greater value than the physical and intellectual labors of men, no matter how much more demanding they might be. Perception is king, after all. Having clarified this, we can observe that human sexual behavior, and by extension most derivative behaviors, arising from biologically conferred sexual roles, will be reflective of the relative supply and demand of that person's services as a market good, as well as a function of the perception of his or her value, which is to say, perception of value will often dictate behavioral norms, as well as differentiated treatment based on perceived sexual marketplace value, whether positive or negative. Let's look at several examples then. The first example we can take is a re-examination of Briffault's law, which shall henceforth be referred to as Briffault's contract, as well as its corollaries, henceforth called stipulations. The contract is signed by two parties, one female, one male, each one representing certain services contributing to the end goal of reproduction. The Stickman stipulations are additions allowed to the participant of higher market value, distinct advantages that the higher market value signee can retain for herself because she effectively can demand a higher price for her goods than can the male, who must, because of lesser market value, demand less. Under this interpretation, it is not so much that the male is unaware of the female stipulations, but rather his accession to them is a consequence of acknowledgement of her higher marketplace value. Thus he will necessarily need to make concessions, should he wish to make any profit upon entering Briffault's contract. Concessions the female will never have to make because of perceived higher value. And this is why the counter-argument that men seek benefit from relationships too is a poor one, because it is malformed, and it does not acknowledge the superior negotiating position of the female based on her perceived greater value. In the same token, the primary description of Briffault's contract allows us to understand why the female determines the conditions of the animal family, as well as being in a position to add stipulations the male is not entitled to. Think of it as a larger, influential company or corporation entering into business relations with a smaller, less influential one. Who has the upper hand? That should be quite clear by now. And this is possibly why we see men not acting in accordance with the Stickman stipulations that women do act in accordance with, why they put up with more, why they usually do not terminate the contract upon cessation of benefit perceived or otherwise. They have never been in a position to do so, this being a reflection of their market value, their services, and a function of their status within the laws of supply and demand. Or, as Gore Writes What once said, a uterus might be worth $1 million, an ejaculation maybe 10 cents. But here we come upon the most important question of perception. The value of anything can ultimately be reduced to human perception. The value of not only the paper money you hold is based upon human perception, but also that of a hard asset such as gold or silver. As Protagoras of Abdera once said, over 2 millennia ago, of all things the measure is man, of the things that they are, and of the things that are not, that they are not. And this indisputably applies to value, where value is derived from perception. So let us envision a hypothetical scenario where diamonds began to wash up on the banks of the Hudson and Harlem rivers in great quantity and on a near daily basis. It stands to reason that over a certain period of time, the value of diamonds would decrease, correlating to Law 3, namely, If demand remains unchanged and supply increases, a surplus occurs, leading to a lower equilibrium price. Demand remains the same, supply increases, price, i.e. value, decreases as a consequence of the surplus, and this can be applied to any good. And it is here where there is a theoretical, and admittedly highly unlikely, silver lining to the economic story of man and woman. I speak, of course, of some technological event, such as the artificial womb, where the demand for womb remains the same, but through technological advancement, supply increases, which would lead to lower prices on female sexual capital, effectively lowering their perceived value. But it does not have to be limited to something such as the artificial womb, as even something much more likely, such as the male pill, could lead to a scenario where the fourth law of supply and demand unfolds, namely, if the demand remains unchanged and supply decreases, a shortage occurs, leading to a higher equilibrium price. In this scenario, the ability of the man to simply withhold his capital, his sperm, as well as his labor, would lead to a decrease in supply and thus to a higher price on his goods. What matters here is, of course, the behavioral consequences of changes in supply and demand in the sexual market. To say that women would depreciate in value and men would appreciate is tantamount to saying that women would lose bargaining power and men would gain, and that men could possibly add their own stipulations to Briffault's contract if they so chose. Truth be told, the last 50-plus years have done just that for women, however. Because with the advent of the pill, sperm banks, and the faceless man, aka the state, women have created their own version of the fourth law, where the pill, sperm banks, and abortion have created a decrease in reproductive supply, dictated on female terms, with male demand for female services remaining the same. Thus we can see the rise of politicized feminism, its acceptance by the common female, as well as typical male acquiescence to it as an acknowledgement of greater perceived value, as if to say that the state and reproductive technologies rendered the human female a precious metal, whereas formerly she was only semi-precious, leading to advanced forms of hypergamy and other destructive behaviors. But for men, it might not even require the development of such technology. All one might need, at least in theory, is for women to price themselves out of the labor market, which is happening slowly, even as I write this. Imagine if a job working on a North Atlantic oil rig paid a measly $20,000 USD a year, with all the expected dangers attached to such work. Imagine if there had been a time when salaries for such work were much, much higher. The analogy is clear. Women represent that dangerous work on the oil rig for a very low salary, where cost-benefit analysis leads to the conclusion that such labor ought better not be pursued, and that is effectively what MGTOW is, in its current state, a trend and development based on economic analysis of the sexual labor market. Women have effectively become the 20K oil rig job, and MGTOW are ahead of their peers in recognizing this. Or as Barbara Russell likes to say, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. So in theory, much of this could change, in theory, given certain immersion technologies or simply an accurate evaluation of the sexual labor market. But we still have a long way to go. What I am attempting to do here is to provide a theoretical framework within which things actually could change, not through unlikely changes in laws, but through a combination of the organic and the artificial. If my thesis is correct, and human sexual market services adhere to the laws of supply and demand with the attendant consequences, then this simply becomes a question of time. When will the requisite technologies be introduced for men? When will the labor market be properly surveyed by men on the whole? Unfortunately, I cannot make a prediction either way, but I hope to have at least adduced some evidence to suggest that if perception is power, then the means of changing perception are at least theoretically attainable.
Remember that biology it forms the basis of virtually all of our behavior, and that behavior can be constrained, shaped in a very limited way and suppressed, of course, if appropriate political or cultural factors are put into place. Well, most women are, well, basically prostitutes. That's what it says. Women have no issues, or they don't like being called out on, of course, but no issues, semi-euphemistic or otherwise, acting as prostitutes do, be they wholesale wife prostitutes, or mistresses, or in some cases actual prostitutes, the ones I respect the most, mind you. But once again, I'll read it again. In China today, the search for a partner is often not inspired by love. Where is the search for a partner inspired by love? That's my own commentary and remark. But driven by a stark financial calculus. Quote, "I'd rather cry in the backseat of a BMW than smile on the back of a bike," end quote, is the common attitude of a certain segment of young girls who are looking for wealthy partners. On the country's most popular online dating sites, women cannot search for potential mates by common interests or hobbies, but they can select whether they require their prospective partner to have a house, a car, as well as a minimal salary level that they would find acceptable. Okay, let's be very clear here. I think that would be honest and much more welcome in the Western dating online circles. Since when do women assess partners primarily on the basis of common interests or hobbies? It's laughable. And yet, of course, in the West, we live with this piece of theater where, lists of common interests and the books and things you like reading. And no, what is it about? It's about cold, hard cash. It's always been about that. In the days prior to a system of currency, it was about being able to bring home the elk meat and put together a shelter. That's what it's always been about. It's never been about anything else. Let's stop kidding ourselves. Well, of course, we here on this channel and elsewhere in the MGTOW community, we're not kidding ourselves, but I think the rest of the world is. Remember the Matrix? You can't bring it up often enough. I would argue that the online dating scene in China is far more unplugged than, in some sense, than the Western one. I'd offer as an aside that instead of having the stupid list of hobbies and what have you, the men might as well just be able to, attach PDF files of their pay stubs so women can look at them appropriately and make an assessment, as well as various other assets, all on convenient PDF files. Men are slaves to the dominance hierarchy. Just as women are slaves to their hypergamy, their biologically based hypergamy, men are slaves to their biologically based dominance hierarchy. That is not going to change as much as people might want it to change. That is the status quo. And when men who are both slaves to the dominance hierarchy and addicted to pussy, to be frank, gain access to wealth, they will spend that wealth on women. It's inevitable. These are human beings just obeying their animal instincts as 99% of the population does or would do if circumstances were identical. And if most men had a lot of money, most men would be acquiring various concubines, prostitutes, however you want to call them. And many women would be, of course, queuing up to become one of those concubines. So it's really nothing special. Here's a woman who I suppose excelled at prostitution, made a huge profit, and got off scot-free after betraying, of course, the men she was liaised with. Shouldn't surprise you. Women don't know anything about honor, and a woman's always going to look for the best deal possible. Now, if she's in trouble, of course she's going to look out for herself. Of course she's going to betray and turn in the men that were feeding her. That's what most women would do. Quote, "If she only had a pretty face and nothing else, there's no way she could have tempted all those officials," said one poster on a popular online forum. Quote, "She must have had something that other girls didn't: maturity, tolerance, and knowledge." Well, no, there's no doubt that she had a lot of cunning, and she probably had a fair degree of intelligence. But what's so admirable about it? Well, the admiration comes from women admire other women who are able to manipulate men, control men, and this just shows that no matter how powerful a man might be, even those powerful men, if they're not aware of their baser instincts, if they have not analyzed them and on an intellectual level, internalized them, and thus rejected those base instincts, they are slaves to their libidos, and they are slaves to their dominance hierarchy inclinations as well. And they can literally, and this was the case, fall to a woman who turned them in without batting an eyelash. This is admired by women because most women don't gain enjoyment from having the power to lord over people in a traditionally more masculine fashion. No, they like using their wiles. The greatest joy for a female in terms of enjoying power is using her physical presentation, of course, as well as a certain level of cunning to take advantage of men and to do with them what they want to do. In the Matrix, the sexes are codependent. Women, on some visceral level, instinctual level, require male resources and labor, and men require pussy, and that will always synergize into some sort of very tenuous alliance. In the case of mistresses, it's in a way sort of purgatory. It's some plane of existence between the fully fledged institution of marriage, which is also prostitution, and the more sort of base, you go to the prostitute for one night and leave after you're done. So it's somewhere in between that. And as I said, it shows that even though these women have plenty of academic opportunities, they're certainly not interested in the academics. I've seen this in the past. There have been a lot of surveys taken and questionnaires put out in the United States, for example, probably not very recently, but certainly in the 80s and 90s, or why women were attending university, and it's to find a husband. You see this over and over and over again. Women, for the most part, don't express profound intellectual interest. The ones that do are true outliers and behave as such.
And my speculation, and this is all just speculation, is that the reason why prostitution is not legal is, once again, an issue of control. Women wishing to control the battlefield, as it were. It's been observed that one of the primary, if not the only assets women have to offer are their looks and their uterus, and basically their offer of sex. The question is, if prostitution were widely available, to what extent would men partake of it? Now, it's not called the oldest profession for nothing. Basically, my thought is that prostitution is heavily controlled by the state. The state itself is heavily controlled by women. Women certainly would never want prostitution to become freely available. Now, ultimately, this is about the market price of sex. If you need to go through all the mechanisms of either a relationship and then finally the scrap heap of marriage, you have a lot of different levels of intervention. Interfering with what probably would be a much cheaper endeavor, or basic market price of sex. Now, if prostitution indeed were widely available, I would make a couple of predictions. I think as much as marriage rates are dropping now, they would drop even more quickly. We would see a very rapid decline in marriage. For the simple reason that because we have the state distorting the price of sex through intervention, the price of sex is very high indeed. The question, once again, is that the market value of sex? Probably not. Though if prostitution were freely accessible, many men would partake of it. No doubt, not only would marriage rates drop, but also the so-called relationship, because men would have an easily accessible means of obtaining sex. The price would actually literally be determined by the market. You would have competition between women offering lower prices in exchange for their services, their bodies, their offer of sex. Very attractive women might be much more expensive than less attractive women, and so there would be a determining factor in the pricing mechanism, based on natural inclinations on the part of men and reactions of women. Relationships would turn out to be, essentially a waste of time in large measure, for the simple reason that after prostitution has been introduced for a long time, to obtain sex very, very cheaply and still have reasonable quality with a reasonably attractive woman. Compare that with the distress, and financial costs of even a normal relationship, whining and dining, putting up with her moods, all of these things, all in an effort to get in her trousers or under her skirt, the portal as I call it. That would still be the primary goal then for the relationship. The man's negotiating power at the table of the relationship would be much, much greater, because a man, beyond of course emotional attachment, could simply just say, you know what, this isn't working for me anymore, and Marla down the street has a special, and she does X, Y, Z. Women in a relationship would be forced to compete with that, which in a positive fashion might very well affect her behavior. Women would never allow this to happen, because all the predictions I'm making would likely come true. They know that if If sex were that easily accessible, their primary power would be lost. And women like having the cushy, comfy lives they had. They wouldn't simply give it up. People in power don't give up their power. That's why we have state interventions in terms of marriage in the sex market, and societal intervention for so-called normal relationships. It's at least clear to me that that's the case.
I will be talking about the darker side of female sexual psychology with regards to mate selection preference. In addition, I will be talking extensively about the concept of the protector and provider, and will argue that at least in a modern context, the protector and provider are rarely interchangeable, although we often hear the terms used as if they were synonymous with each other. On the other hand, I will also argue that in prehistoric times, the man who embodied the sought-after protector and provider role was, in fact, one and the same, and this has led to a powerful and disastrous dichotomy in the modern female's mate selection preferences. In prehistoric times, without the advancements of a complex economy and technology, the protector and provider were two sides of the same coin. He was the alpha male brute, if you will. In his role as a provider, he was an efficient hunter, likely skilled in constructing shelter, and possessed great physical prowess and stature. In short, he was able to provide food and shelter to his female mates, thus optimizing the survival chance of his offspring. A protector in the eyes of a female was, and is, a man who is willing to inflict violence upon others, on her behalf, to ensure the survival of her offspring and the survival of said female. He is, in essence, the perfect proxy agent for violence, and he will wield violence in her name both to protect her interests and his perceived interests, inasmuch as he is very willing to commit violence against interloper men whom he sees as a threat, as well as men whom his female mate sees as a threat. Have you ever asked yourself what the allure of a man in uniform is for a female? A man in uniform is not necessarily rich, but he is a man who, by the very definition of his trade, is committed to inflicting violence upon the world. With the coming of civilization, a trade and barter system, as well as modernizing technology, the protector-provider role began to dissolve itself of its synonymous qualities. With an economy and currency, as well as modern conveniences, physical prowess and violence became less and less of a factor concerning provision. This allowed many so-called beta males to compete for female attention in the mating game because of their ability to provide for the female in economic terms. However, this provision, it must be noted, is not the same thing as protection, and is not viewed as such by the female. Because the protector and provider role was one and the same for most of our history as a species, the coming of modernity has allowed for somewhat paradoxical instincts in the modern female, although her sexual urges remain much the same. The typical modern male provider is not violent by his nature. He is a worker, and he offers his labor and money in exchange for access to female sex and reproduction. This is, of course, prostitution, since virtually every relationship based solely on provision is simply an exchange of resources, money for sex. Women even appear to be somewhat hardwired for this sort of relationship of prostitution on some basic level, as evidenced by female simians of the lower orders of primates engaging in prostitution in exchange for resources as soon as some trade and barter system is established, or a service can be rendered in exchange for sex. Suffice to say, the provider male-female relationship is always mercantile in nature and based on exchange of goods or services, and lacks any other foundation. Some observations on monkeys. In 2005, a Yale behavioral economist with an interest in evolution and anthropology conducted experiments with capuchin monkeys, wherein he introduced a trade and barter system to the monkeys, who then grew to understand and make use of it. During this experiment, female monkeys were observed to engage in sex after being paid a token by the male monkey. Upon receiving the token and copulating, the female monkey immediately traded in for a grape. Does this sound familiar? In addition, sex for service has also been observed in other lower primate species. Quote, according to the paper Payment for Sex in the Macaque Mating Market, published in the December issue of Animal Behavior, males in a group of about 50 long-tailed macaques in Kalimantan Tengah, Indonesia, traded grooming services for sex and females. Researchers who studied the monkeys for some 20 months found that males offered their payment up front as a kind of pre-sex ritual. It worked.
After the females were groomed by the male partners, female sexual activity more than doubled, from an average of 1.5 times an hour to 3.5 times. The study also showed that the number of minutes that males spent grooming hinged on the number of females available at the time. The better a male's odds of getting lucky, the less nitpicking time the females received. Though primates have been observed trading grooming for food sharing or infant care, this is the first time this kind of exchange has been observed between male and female primates in a sexual context, demonstrating that the amount of time a male macaque will invest in his partner depends largely on how many options it has around. We, more evolved primates, may be tempted to take a cynical view of these findings, but the study's author suggests a more favorable interpretation. The macaque's exchange of services simply illustrates a nifty system of cooperation that allows for successful mating. The basic premise, says Gummert, is called biological market theory, which follows the elementary principles of supply versus demand. When applied to the voluntary sex life of a long-tailed macaque, it means that the price that one group is willing to pay for a commodity, the other group depends on the scarcity or abundance of that commodity on the market, end quote. Therefore, it is safe to say that the act of prostitution is not only confined to humans, but can be found in other primates as well, and seems to have some sort of innateness to it, inasmuch as it occurs rather readily in nature. I will argue here that as soon as some form of trade and barter system became predominant among humans, prostitution soon accompanied it, with males paying females, either with currency or some other service for sex, and that the exchange of services had very little to do with the attraction felt by said females to the males that did it. It was pure business and profit. Sex was, and always has been, just a commodity on the market, nothing more and nothing less. The only distinction between so-called working girls that society looks down upon and marriage is of duration and honesty. The acknowledged working girl has integrity in what she does. The wife in sheep's clothing does not. My argument here is simple, namely that so-called beta providers do not arouse female sexual interest, and to the extent that sex is on offer, it is on offer in the form of a pure business transaction. Now, it seems to me that the corollaries of Briffault's law are principally applicable to the provider-prostitute relationship. It is effectively no different from any other contract. When Company A provides a service for payment to Company B, and the contract has been fulfilled and finished, the particular service around which that contract centered is no longer operative after completion of said contract. The problem and issue of the provider-prostitute relationship is that the terms of service are not explicitly stated and are often couched in fairy tale-esque language such as romance and love, and furthermore, only the female possesses awareness, and quite vague, I might add, of those terms. So her service, sex, can come to an abrupt halt unbeknownst to her male provider, business partner, who likely does not see the relationship in such purely transactional terms, at least on a conscious level, which of course is belied by the fact that he keeps up with the 70-hour work week because he knows the consequences if he fails. The contract is further distorted by the family divorce court system, wherein the male is deprived of the benefits of his labor upon the perceived completion of the contract in the eyes of the female, yet he must continue paying for services no longer rendered. So there is a double distortion, which I will repeat here. 1. Only the female is aware of the terms of service and the contractual terms, and the contract can be terminated by her at any moment on a whim if she so desires. And 2, the state aids the female in further contractual obfuscation by forcing the male partner to pay for services that are no longer in effect, and on terms he was not even aware of in the first place. Thus the real issue at hand is the obfuscation and deception inherent in the provider-prostitute relationship. Only one party member understands intuitively what's going on, and the other party member is left in the dark for the most part, with very real legal consequences for his benighted state of mind. Let us now return to the original alpha male brute. I will argue that it is only this type of male that actually arouses female sexual desire, and is also the primary object of desire for DNA propagation. You often see this with cuckolding. The married provider provides for the cuckolded children of the wife, and the alpha male brute lends her his genetic material. Moreover, you may ask why I am so convinced that this alpha male brute has the power to wrench away any illusion of loyalty a female might have to her male provider. Well, this can be seen in the dalliances that both French and Norwegian women had with Nazi soldiers during World War II, often abandoning their spouses in the process. In particular, we can see that during the Nazi occupation, not a small number of children were conceived by French women paired up with Nazi soldiers. Quote, despite more than 2 million Frenchmen being held in prisoner of war camps, the birth rate boomed in 1942 with an estimated 200,000 children born to Franco-German couples. Up to 30% of births were illegitimate in parts of Paris. That is an impressive number, and illustrates well the innate female drive and lust for the alpha male brute, symbolized here by the conquering Nazi forces. It is this sort of man that sparks her reproductive drive. The provider is merely a means to an end. The alpha male brute is that end. That is not to say that women do not mate with provider types, they do, but if a choice exists between one or the other with regards to progeny, the alpha brute will certainly be favored. It is interesting, as an aside, that after the war was over, in both France and Norway, where women had extended dalliances with Nazi soldiers and officers, that their punishment was most commonly to have their hair shorn off in public. I needn't remind you what happened to male turncoats. Execution, of course. And here, I would like to digress somewhat and address this issue, and it is the issue of female weakness not being equated with male weakness. You'll hear no argument from me against the idea that both men and women are flawed, albeit in different ways. What raises my ire, and it should yours, is that female weakness almost universally receives a free pass. If wartime traitors who were male were almost without exception put to death, why were women punished, and I use the term loosely, with the laughably lenient act of having their hair shorn off? Make no mistake, what happened in France and Norway were indeed acts of hypergamy, and yet we have seen hypergamy, understood to be a uniquely female behavioral deficiency, played down and even ignored. There seem to be two types of deflection when it comes to hypergamy, both stemming primarily from men. The first is the more common, and is simply a redefining of the word. Here, hypergamy is simply a woman wanting, quote, a better life for herself, end quote, and wanting to be happy. And no different to a man wishing for himself a better life and the pursuit of happiness. It becomes so watered down when treated this way that it ceases to exist for all practical purposes. But let us discuss the apex fallacy. It is most commonly made with regards to men, allegedly being on top of society. Quote, if you take such statements by women, such as men run the world, that is true for them because only men they can see are the ones who run the world, meaning that women will only see that which is above them. The common belief that divorce rates are driven by men discarding older wives for a younger model simply doesn't fit with the data. This is reinforced when you consider that the AARP found that 66% of the divorces in middle age were initiated by women. This fits with the historical trends of women of all ages initiating divorce. Even in middle age, women are still the ones driving divorce rates. The myth of the unloyal husband dumping his hapless wife upon once he feels it is to his advantage to do so is generally just that, a myth. This won't stop women from pointing over and over again to the rare cases they know of in the media or in person where this has occurred, but in the scheme of things, this is clearly an outlier. Across age ranges, divorce is being driven by women, and the likelihood of a couple divorcing in any given year tracks very strongly with whether the wife feels it would be to her advantage not to keep her promise, end quote. So much for the absurd idea that men are hypergamous, or that hypergamy is simply wanting a better life for yourself, to be equated with any other path leading to such a better life. As far as hypergamy being the same as laughable patriarchy theory, the numbers do not lie. We can track female hypergamy via divorce correlated with age group. The same cannot be said for patriarchy theory, which has no data whatsoever, just the chimeras of the fanciful. So, let us take all this into account now. The natural and uniquely female attribute of hypergamy, her preference for domineering brutish men in her mate selection, and the modern state, which in a way is the ultimate alpha male brute, using coercive force to extract wealth from men, primarily providers, fulfilling virtually every wish of the female. All of these circumstances render the possibility of a functional, let alone healthy relationship or marriage a nigh impossibility. There is the natural preference of the female to choose the alpha male brute, at the same time relying on a provider male for raising the offspring. Nevertheless, when the ultimate provider comes along, the state, coupled with the qualities of an alpha male brute, no single man, either provider or brute, can compete. This is the dilemma of the modern man, who is doubly afflicted by the burdens nature set upon him, but also by those burdens of the state, itself ultimately derivative of nature, being essentially socialized natural urges and tendencies in the form of a superstructure. Viewing this colossus of the impossible, most men would rather shut their eyes and dive off the cliff. I find a need to address this because this feel-gooditis, as I have termed it, is very dangerous to men on the whole. What exactly do I mean by feel-gooditis? Quite simply, the willingness to cast aside all evidence in an effort to feel good or retain some form of vague hope. I can put it in simple terms. Imagine you are a shrewd businessman, and you are about to embark on a business venture. Before doing so, you do a risk assessment. You find out that the business deal has a 95% chance of generating massive losses to you after a 3-year period, possibly losing quadruple what you originally invested. Would you invest your money in the deal? Likely not. But most men do not act as shrewd businessmen do when it comes to women. Rather, they are much more akin to gambling and lottery addicts. Imagine if a certain lottery game offered a 1 in 50 million chance of winning. Those are bad odds. And the thing that the typical man does not understand is that each time he plays, his chances stay at 1 in 50 million, because he does not grasp that that repetition and frequency do not increase his odds. He buys ticket after ticket in the vain hope that something will crystallize. And looking at these examples, both that of the shrewd businessman and the lottery addict, is there any area where human beings take upon themselves such astronomically poor odds? I can think of none. But like a broken wind-up doll, your average man continues to turn the levers of the casino slot machine as if oblivious. Cognitive dissonance would be an understatement. If I further extend the analogy, women are the slot machines in the casino, and the state is the casino itself. Both forces are arrayed against the man. Hope and change. Do you remember that slogan? That one. The one used by Obama. Well, hope is the last vestige of a fairy tale that you once believed. You know it to be false. Why persist in the charade? I ask this simply because, unfortunately, too many men saddled with too much hope end up a corpse on the floor by their own hand.
The kinds of women, these potential women you could date, you're talking about, to call them needles in the haystack, sorry, it's a bit funny. That would be a euphemism. We're talking about microbacteria in a haystack. We're talking, your chances are so infinitesimally small so as to not exist. And that's part of the problem. The other problem is Briffault's law, which I always like to stress. At the end of the day, men are simply utilities, tools, appliances for a woman. This has been the state of affairs since time immemorial, since thousands, if not millions of years in our hominid ancestors. Well, put it this way, if a man chooses to date in today's atmosphere, he needs to be aware of Briffault's law, and he needs to be aware that every relationship with a woman at the end of the day is simply a business transaction, and usually the goods being exchanged are resources, money, luxury, in exchange for access to the vaginal orifice. If a man is content with that, that's okay. What's not okay is if a man does not wish to merely be an application, a tool, an appliance, a utility, and goes into the so-called dating scene with the notion that he is anything but that. Be aware that no woman loves a man, she only loves what he can do for her. And so the perceived love will evaporate upon his inability to provide the goods that she perceives as being her entitlement or her right or her desires. And he will be thrown upon the trash heap when a better opportunity, i.e. a man who can provide the resources to a better degree, to a greater extent, and so on and so forth, comes on the scene. Unless they're very clear about the nature of the business contract. If a man has enough resources, financial, material, to engage in socially accepted prostitution, I have nothing against prostitution. Ultimately, that's what a relationship is, right? That's fine. But let's call it what it is. Let's not pretend that these things you mention, common interests, maybe a similar sense of humor, and so on and so forth, at the end of the day, that they are the contributing factors. These are things that can create the illusion of cooperation, of unison, of unity. But the underlying factors, the fact that a man is and will always only be a utility for a woman, that will never change. No matter how much a man might have in quote-unquote common with a woman and say something on that issue. Talk about looking for microbacteria in a haystack. Finding a woman with common interests, that's pretty rare. But I think most men, upon rational reflection, experience, realize that there's no bang for the buck. Well, there is, right? You're paying for sex, essentially, but the benefits beyond that are marginal at best. Men's emotional needs are completely neglected because, remember, men are not permitted to show any signs of weakness. And once again, as a final point, we men are and will always be appliances, utilities, tools to service the pleasure and interests of women. And what women bring to the table is simply spreading their legs. There's nothing else that they have ever brought to the table, and nothing else that I can imagine they can, at least within a relationship. The problem is, on a societal level, everywhere, that if you have an actual rapist, a male rapist, or an actual murderer, or a robber, or a thief, or a wife beater, that particular individual male's behavior, is transformed into a universal axiom across the boards. That is to say that man A beats his wife, ergo all men beat their wives. Man B raped a college-age girl, i.e. all men do this. So there's an instantaneous transformation of one individual's behavior. It's put on the rest of us. All men are responsible. It's a form of collective guilt, supposedly, right? That one man does it, and so it's perceived as an axiom. If there could be such thing as a behavioral axiom, that would be it. One man commits ill, then all men are responsible. But let's look at the other side of the coin. If an individual woman commits ill, crime, murder, rape, whatever, there are usually two responses. One, we often hear that not all women are like that, which we've discussed ad nauseum, and it's devoid of content, doesn't explain anything. But that's what they say. Even, I don't know which one is worse. The other one is, it's not even, they just say she was crazy. No one, I've never heard say, well, woman beats her children and then stabs her husband to death. No one says, well, that's what women do. It was just that one individual. If you're in a relationship and it goes south, there can be a lot worse consequences than you merely suffering from heartbreak or not being able to concentrate on stuff and being sad. I mean, that's a given anyway in most cases. Of course, it can be a lot worse. Now, I haven't been a victim of this, but I did have a friend at some point in time whose ex would inflict wounds on herself and then claim that he did it. He actually got in trouble for that. As I said, no matter how good a guy you might be, if you don't think this shit can happen to you, either have violence inflicted on you by a female or the female using deception to convince external people, particularly authorities, or the power to arrest you or throw you in jail, that you don't believe that a female could do that, I assure you that they can, and no matter how sweet you might think they are, you should really be aware of that.
You see lots of complaints these days online about women complaining about their boyfriends watching too much porn or the husband. See, the reason being that it's quick, it's efficient, and you don't have anyone complaining afterwards. And you don't have anyone, whinging or creating a stressful situation. And to be honest, let's just think about the evolving mind, right? Yeah, I mean, the sex drive that we all have is the most primitive thing out there. But, I mean, how many times have you just felt the urge, you're feeling randy or whatever, and you just would prefer not to. You'd prefer just to, I don't know, read a book or play tennis or play a computer game or take a walk or do whatever. There's just so many other things you prefer to do, and yet this addictive call is sort of urging you in the back of your mind to sort of do something about it. And of course, that's natural. But what I'm talking about here is a sort of evolved mind moving past that. Let's be honest, man, what really is the charm of something that most of the time is not really that great, that is time consuming in acquiring it? mean, that's just my perspective on it. It's not that I've lost interest in sex. It's just been more that the urge is just kind of more of an annoyance more than anything else, and something I just like to get out of the way.
And I saw this guy groveling to his girlfriend, begging her, asking her what he did wrong. And she had this snide, disgusting, arrogant look on her, refused to speak to him. And I just thought to myself, I am so tired of seeing that. And the fact of the matter is, whilst it's not a perfect analogy, please someone tell me how a man's addiction to the female is any different to a drug addiction. I'm quite serious. And so man's so-called interest in women really is nothing but a biochemical addiction. And it's reached the point where it brings nothing but self-destruction to the man. When you're a crack or a heroin addict, no one is encouraging you to continue the habit, as I mentioned before. And they're not going to shame you if you try to quit. No one's going to say, oh, you just weren't strong enough to keep on smoking crack, were you? Oh, you didn't want to shoot up anymore? Oh, you're such a pussy. They're not going to say anything like that. Not so when you decide to kick your addiction to women. It definitely is an upwards battle, and you have social institutions very much against it. What's important and what distinguishes me and other men going their own way who realize these things, I should hope, is that we're aware of it at least, and we're doing what we can to combat it. I refuse to ever put myself in a position where I'm groveling at a woman's feet. They possess something that the vast majority of men idolize, and hence they use it as a weapon to full effect, be it in the social institutions of the government or on an interpersonal level through withholding sex. You withhold sex from a man, you punish him. You offer it to him, you manipulate him. That is the purpose of a woman's interest in men, essentially. It's to get him to do what she wants and to kowtow to her wishes. Should he not do that, he will be punished, either through depriving him of sex, possibly cheating, who knows, all sorts of different methods women will employ to punish a man.
Homophobia, or rather, I prefer hostility towards homosexual men, is female in origin. It's gynocentric. One needs to think about the symbolism of the homosexual man. A man who is completely immune to any sort of temptation in this regard. He has effectively no desire whatsoever. So the woman who is jiggling her jugs and swaying her ass, this has no effect on him. He's completely immune to it. And so what I'm saying is that the homosexual man is a man who exists outside of the influence, at least the direct influence, of the female. A man who cannot be controlled by her cleavage, by her physical appearance, by her so-called beauty. Heterosexual men are readily and constantly controlled by this. In fact, heterosexual men exist to serve women because of this, because of their physical attraction and because of their need for reproductive resources. Homosexual man exists outside of this paradigm. Thus, the homosexual man in many ways is a threat to the female. Remember, women want to keep everything under control, their firm control. They don't like men doing their own thing. A man who not only does his own thing, but has no sexual interest, i.e. no interest, period, in association with the female, per se, unless perhaps it's through work or what have you, it represents an incredible threat. There's nothing she can do, at least using conventional means, to get him under her control, to get him under her spell. There's nothing she can do. She could wear a short skirt, going up to her hips, have, an F cup hanging out, and he doesn't care. So what does she try to do? She tries to influence it indirectly. And this results in a feeling of terror in heterosexual men that they might be dubbed gay. Because to be dubbed gay is to effectively be kicked out of the dominance hierarchy. It's not that you're at the bottom rungs of the dominance hierarchy if you're dubbed gay. It's because you're not even in the dominance hierarchy. You're not even in a state of competition. You simply exist outside of it. And so what you end up with is an irrational, female-oriented fear and oftentimes hatred of homosexuals, and in particular of being labeled such themselves. Many men they're terrified of being called gay. And you can see this constantly. When you decline a woman's so-called interest in you, when you say you're not interested, or even make statements like, I prefer being single, or what have you, what's one of the first things she says? Are you gay? There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, this sort of double entendre. Are you gay? There's nothing wrong with that. All right? Because heterosexual men are terrified of losing access to reproductive resources. I mean, once you've mastered your psyche to a certain point and you understand the games and the mechanics that women apply and employ, then it doesn't have any effect anymore. But for most men, your conventional pussy-begging mangina man, this is just terrifying. To be called gay means you're not even in the game anymore, and you're not even competing anymore, and you can't even get any woman. No man wants to be cast out of the dominance hierarchy. But think about what the homosexual man represents for the heterosexual man. There's no reason, in a rational sense, that a heterosexual man should have any fear, hatred, or any feeling, for that matter, towards homosexual men. They don't represent anything. In fact, most rationally speaking, the homosexual man is a boon to the heterosexual man because he represents one less man that he has to compete against in order to get reproductive resources. But there is, of course, a more complicated aspect to a lot of this, and let's not kid ourselves. I mean, feminism in the 60s and 70s tried to pick up just huge swathes of disparate ethnic groups, minority groups, and this is for the same reason, because women realized they couldn't control these groups directly, and so to assimilate them into the so-called greater cause by dint of association is a less effective, however, still a means of controlling them. So many homosexual men fell for this, no doubt. People have a natural weakness to submit to a sort of victimhood narrative. People like being victims, so no one's completely immune. And of course, I rebuke the claim that MGTOW in any shape or form is one of those victimhood movements, because we just say, well, we're tired, everyone, we just get on with our lives. We're not trying to change the system, we're trying to get out of Dodge, essentially.
We reserve the right to practice our own form of defense, which is our turning our backs to it and walking away.